Good morning, everyone. We have in the studio LP Peterson. LP is a program manager at Apple, and we are super thrilled to have here with us in the studio and excited to hear LP's story of how did she become a woman in tech. So, without further ado, I'm just going to pass it all to LP. Tell us all about it. You've had a fantastic journey. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm LP Peterson. I've been at Apple a few different times, which is a fun part of my story. All opinions are my own. I just have to have the disclaimer, of course. I'm here as a woman in tech, not as an Apple employee. And yeah, I've been working in program management since I was about 17 years old. So I have quite a history with it, and I'm happy to get into it with Igor and Shivam. Thanks for having me.
Wow, 17 years. I want to hear more. So what attracted you to program management? Did you know that this was a discipline? It's a very important discipline in tech. But tell us more about what you were doing at 17.
Sure. Yeah, I started with an industrial engineering degree path at college and just loved the fact that I could be in charge and tell people what to do with also getting the support that I needed from people who knew more than I did. And so it was responsible for all the things that I felt really competent in. I was a big sister, I have three younger siblings, so it just felt almost like a natural extension of the big family lifestyle where you're trying to coordinate what every different person wants for dinner, even, it's kind of the same thing. And so got into it at a very young age and kept going with it. And it's afforded me a lot of opportunities to work in different industries, which is something that I love. I started in manufacturing, bottling. I went to plastics and like device manufacturing after that, and then switched to software after that. So it's like, it's given me this opportunity to be involved in an important way with a lot of different industries and projects. And I think that's really awesome about program management.
I agree. And I'm curious what led you to industrial engineering. Everybody assumes tech is equal to software. At Max, thanks to the boom in AI and hardware is finally getting its space in the ranks. But industrial engineering, how did you land on that as a major? It's a very male dominated field. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about working in manufacturing and male-dominated industries is that the female restroom is so clean. You almost get your own bathroom. It's fantastic. But it's also a very real problem. Manufacturing for me started with bottling. My first internship, it was with Coca-Cola at 17. And so that was maybe I was just turned 18. But anyway, it was like very young in my career. That was my first official job. And it turns out factories are mostly run by software. So having those diagnostic skills, having those critical thinking skills, being able to use Excel or just any type of spreadsheet to figure out what you're putting on the line and what's coming off the line and what the bottlenecks are. No pun intended. But like, yes, that's what we were doing in the factory. And I thought that my program management skills continued to develop in that environment, and it was really rewarding.
I think you gave the analogy of putting together dinner for the family and everybody has their own demands. Couldn't have used a better analogy to describe program management. And it's such a catch-all field as well. I have been a program manager in my life, and it's very difficult to explain to people what do you do because you do it all.
Do nothing and everything. Sometimes they call, IE, industrial engineering, imaginary engineering. I'm like, "Yes, all of the imaginary things, all of the staging, all of the things that nobody really thinks about as core to their job, you have to transform and contort yourself in some ways to fill these needs," and I find that to be really engaging and challenging work.
So, LP, as we were just talking before we started to record, one of my favorite program managers who happens to be at Google right now was also a genius at Apple. And I want to hear more about all the wisdom that you gained in that experience.
Sure, yeah, I like to say I'm an ex-genius, when people are like, "Oh, that's so smart." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm an ex-genius." But it really is a great opportunity to get in with a great company. I think Apple does and has done a very good job of training geniuses and investing upfront in, like, not just the technological skills, they expect you to have a little of that coming in usually, like, I know how iOS works, I know how macOS works, I can find the system library, like, those kinds of things are necessary about being a genius, but the training that they provide is mostly focused on empathizing with customers, customer service. You have to put yourself in the place of, I'm not going to deal with a customer who's having a good day probably all day. Whoever I meet is going to be having like this terrible experience of this device that lives like almost attached to their body, is failing them in some way. So, how do you come into that situation and turn it into a positive engagement is really the crux of what their customer service was all about. Being young and learning how to do that provides a great foundation for the rest of life, I think. So, if you're young and you're listening to this, like the Genius role, the Apple retail environment is a really great way to get knowledge and skills that are important for life.
Sounds like a really great opportunity to get some basics on how to communicate with people. And I want to do just one step back for our listeners who are not necessarily from the US. We have part of our listeners from Europe. Can you just very briefly explain who is Genius?
I mean, there are plenty of stores all around the world. If you're in Europe and you don't live near one, the Apple Store experience is where customers can buy things, of course, but there's also a customer service element. So you can schedule an appointment and get the help that you need with the device that you have. Similar to phone service, but yeah, that's still that in-person experience most companies don't offer these days.
And now you're engineering program manager at Apple. And can you walk us through your typical work day just for people to understand what you do as part of your job?
Sure, yeah. Recording podcasts is not a normal part of my day, but happy to be here with all of you, of course. The day-to-day is cross-functional meetings. It's structuring communications that go out to possibly thousands of software developers, however large your organization that you're supporting is, and really making sure that everyone around your team understands the drumbeat of what we're doing for a release. So at this moment in time, we should be fixing our most critical bugs. At this time in the year, we should be focusing on our most exciting features, development, and doing some of the more risky things, and choosing the level of engagement that you have throughout the year and designing that heat map in a way that meets the goals of your company. And that's what program management is. And hopefully, if you have good communication and those things work out correctly, then you're able to have exciting launches when your executives need them.
Seems like a really interesting and very responsible job. And when we first met, you told me that one of the things you're really passionate about is emotion management, and the topic of our conversation today is emotional resilience in tech. So, can you tell us why are you so passionate about emotion management?
I think it's one of the things that's held me back the most in my career. It's been really difficult had been really difficult for me to come across as an emotionally resilient leader. Um, as somebody who likes to be in control, it can be really difficult, right? When things aren't going correctly, when unexpected requirements come in, to respond to that with grace and humility and curiosity and all of these things that embody the resilient emotion experience that we hope to bring to the people around us. And there are a couple of different reasons for that, and I'd love to get into them with you now.
Yeah, let's dive deep. This is a topic very dear to my heart. So when Igor and I were sharing notes on this topic, it just reminded me of so many stories from my journey, LP, where it has been hard to be carrying your heart on your sleeves and being that whip cracker. Program manager is nothing but a whip cracker. You basically are going to make people do things that they don't want to do, but it's needed because that's what's needed for the project. That's what's needed for the company, and you assume that responsibility, but also you assume a psychological responsibility, which is I'm not going to let this project down, I'm not going to let my leadership down, I'm going to do the right thing for my company. And as women, those boundaries of we're doing this for the company and we're doing this for the people who really matter to us, the boundaries start getting blurred a bit, right? And maybe in our minds it's very clear why we are having a strong reaction, which people might phrase as you were having an emotional reaction in that meeting, versus what I probably thought was I was just being passionate about a particular conversation and I was bringing the voice of the customer that is not in the room, but it got labeled as you being very emotional. And that's been hard because you're bringing voices that are not sitting on those tables, and your voice can quiver. Mine does when I talk about them. I'm curious about your stories. I want to hear more, and especially since you've been in really tough industries. So you have some probably war badges that you're carrying that the world should listen.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about, especially that part that you mentioned about it's my responsibility to make this project successful. And I think that was the crux of where my emotional resilience was breaking down. I felt so personally responsible for things that were either impossible, completely outside my control, very much in someone else's domain, competing priorities, all of these things. And when I started seeing myself more as the conduit for what was possible for that release, and also that it was my responsibility to communicate those challenges rather than solve them myself, is when I really started seeing the growth in my career. So I think that's an important thing for program managers to realize is like, yes, you have power and yes, your voice is important, but it's more about facilitating that collaboration and seeing yourself more as a project coach. A coach can do everything that they can to practice and get things ready and, make the experience on the field really awesome for the team. But if that coach is on the sideline saying, "Oh, my team can't do this. Oh, my team isn't successful," it's going to bring morale down. And so that's where the project therapy side comes into it more than the project management side of it, which is, kind of it's abstract for sure. But I do think that it's important for somebody who's in a program management position to realize, yes, even when things are going incorrectly, that's great. It's my responsibility to communicate those challenges in a way that might make it more possible to solve them rather than take on that personal guilt for the failure.
Oh, yeah, and sounds really interesting, and it feels like there is a lot of responsibility and a lot of place for fulfillment working on projects impacting millions of users, but also, of course, some pressure. And can you maybe share some of the things that help you manage the team, regulate the emotional component of the whole work for not only yourself, but for your team members as well?
Yeah, that's a really important space, and I think something that's not recognized enough is that emotions within a team have an element of contagion, not like COVID, but a little bit like that, where you're in a room with people and you see like, oh, this person's feeling anxious, and then all of a sudden I'm feeling that anxiety a little bit, or like, oh, this person's really angry. Should I also be angry? And learning to separate that effect is happening, but also what is the action that I can take? What are my emotions about this and separating it from the other people? As program managers that are successful, we're usually very in tune with the moods and like reactions and I call them like sound bites, like what of our executive team, like we're very in tune with all of that. And sometimes we forget that we have our own opinions and like we have our own experience that we can lean back on as well. So yeah, remembering, okay, this is my place, these are my opinions in this situation, and bringing that forward. I think to your point about millions of users could be affected by this. It's like, yes, but that's the business. And the great thing about software is most of it can be undone. But having those conversations like, okay, if this does go wrong, what's our plan? How do we backtrack? How do we reverse this mistake? I think is something that is a really important conversation for a program manager to always be leading.
Such a great point, and it reminded me that when we were preparing for our episode today and discussing it with Shivam, she mentioned that in some cases, people might expect from you as a woman a more emotional reaction and also kind of more caring, nurturing reaction, almost like motherly. Have you ever experienced that type of perception towards you, and how do you manage or embrace it?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. There are those expectations, right? How we present ourselves, how we look, how we talk about our lives. There's all sorts of ways that you can get distracted, right? And so I think it's important for a program manager to realize, like, okay, these are the people around me. This is their role. What role do I need? Maybe there's already a nurturer on the team, but maybe there isn't. So you're thinking about the team as a whole and the role that you might play rather than what people might just expect because of how you look or present. But there's an element of improv, an element of acting to program management where like you need to kind of transform to what the project requirements need of you. And sometimes that is a nurturing person. Like sometimes it's a team of people that are just not nurturing. And so if you can bring that to the team, great. But if that's not needed or that's not your personality or you're not comfortable doing that, I think the way that you present yourself to the team, you can change that perception for sure.
Yet it's a good reminder of a concept that we were discussing with Farah Mitra, who came to our show a few episodes ago, and she was talking about radical candor, something that I've practiced a lot, and especially in program management and in tech, which tends to be very male dominated. having that radical candor and establishing that as your fundamental principle or foundational principle goes a long way, because you've established that when needed, I can be your nurturer, but my goal here is to push the envelope. So you see me pushing the boundaries, but know that I'm doing that because I have immense belief in your potential, and that it takes time to establish. And if you've been with teams longer, it comes more naturally. I think it's I think I've repeated that success story at least 3 times now, and it kind of works. Where even in my recent role, I joined less than a year ago, but I've had moments where I have to play those hats. But I've had to put on that bad cop hat on and say, this stops now. And they're like, well, no, 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 no. If she's really upset, this means we've done something really wrong here. Something might be really, really falling off the tracks. But it's that belief that you have in the potential of the people around you, which gives you that freedom to execute and wield the power that a program manager has to wield. I'm curious, LP, how things are at Apple or in general in your experience. But I've seen women be just a tad bit better at this, just structuring the teams, getting shit done, and being able to rally the teams towards a common purpose without losing the focus, which tends to happen in large organizations. And it tends to be a very woman dominated field. Is that your experience as well?
I'd say we have a good mix. Like my particular role in industry, especially in software, we have a good mix of EPMs that are both women and men. And manufacturing, too, a good amount of men in the EPM role. Typically, it's like engineers who didn't like the day-to-day grind of what they were doing. And that's both true on like the male and the female side of things. And they kind of decided to get into program management after having done a technical role for a while, which is really valuable, and I think that that experience is important. But yes, there is that element, right, of like, I'm the coach of this team. What does this team need right now? Can I provide it myself? Do I need to bring in somebody else? Those types of internal dialogues are going to be very helpful in making a project successful. And sometimes that is right. Yeah, I'm the task manager today, or I'm the coach and the nurturer tomorrow. You just have to fill the crack however it presents to you.
Well said. Well said. Another question I have around this area, which is something which comes to feedback, and another topic we discuss quite a lot on the podcast. Have you ever received feedback that you are too emotional?
Don't think I have. Yeah. I have receive feedback about like a particular instance, like what somebody would call an outburst. And it's funny because the company culture has mattered more about that. Like when I have been at Apple versus not been at Apple, Apple is kind of passionate sometimes, we still carry that Steve Jobs like theatrics sometimes where it's like, oh yeah, I'm allowed to get passionate about this customer facing issue. And I joined a startup that was like extremely conservative. And like one day I was like, oh, we just can't allow that or something in a meeting. And they gave me feedback that that was an emotional outburst. And I was like, wow, emotional outburst is it's so dependent on the environment and the cultural norm that it really comes down to the program manager observing what that norm is and then not going above it or below it unless it's really necessary. So it definitely depends on your environment.
I wanted to segue to another very interesting segment of our show, which we call listeners' questions. And before we dive into those questions, I wanted to ask you, LP, one question. Have you ever experienced an imposter syndrome?
I think imposter syndrome kind of like weaves its way in and out depending on the day. Some days you're like driving to work and like, yes, I have everything. The universe is at my back. Everything's great. And then like something happens that afternoon, perhaps. This happened to me like yesterday. And I was thinking like, "Oh, now how am I going to get promoted? How am I going to achieve what I want? Like, I don't have the skills. I don't have the support. I don't have the advocates. So I think it can be something that comes on very suddenly and can also leave very suddenly. The thing that I like to acknowledge about imposter syndrome is it is just a feeling one day. It's like, I'm feeling like an imposter today. That's cute. Like, let's move
Yeah.
on. I'm already here. I already am in this position. I'm just going to do the best that I can. I heard another female leader speak about that, and she's like, I don't know who the imposter is going to be because I'm already here. And like, let's just move on to the next thing. And I really value that perspective, and I think it was great advice.
Your voice should act, your inner voice is very powerful. Kudos to you for developing that. How did you develop that? I'm curious. It's very rare that you would find people developing that inner voice without any help?
My negative internal dialogue was so strong and so powerful that I realized it was a problem pretty early in my life and got, coaching and help for that. Read some books that were really helpful. But just all these things to kind of be aware of the problem and start recognizing that that was going to harm me and not help me in my career. So if you are dealing with that on a regular basis, no, you don't have to. You can look in the mirror and pump yourself up instead of rip yourself down. I think that's a really important skill to develop. It's not something people are born with. If you're lucky, your family was that way and like gave you that different internal dialogue. But for a lot of us in tech, a lot of us achieving for the first time in our families, that's not something that we got. So it's important to develop it yourself.
Absolutely. And you're the perfect person to ask one of the questions from our listeners. So she asks the following: I have 15 years of experience, but struggle with increasing visibility. How can I address imposter syndrome and self doubt? Maybe you can share some tips, tricks, practical techniques that worked for you.
One of the life-changing concepts in this area for me was somebody told me like, "Oh, you're not a thermometer, you're a thermostat." A thermometer just reflects the temperature in the room, and I think in as program managers, it's easy to fall into that bucket of like, "Oh, this is what the project's doing today, therefore I'm sad or therefore I'm happy or whatever." But somebody told me like, "No, if you wanna lead, if you wanna get the visibility, if you want to stop feeling like an imposter, start imagining yourself as the person who sets that temperature in the room. Does it need to be warmer today? Does it need to be cooler today?" And start figuring out the actions that you can take. Maybe this is what a coach can help you with, but what actions can I take on a day-to-day basis to set that temperature where it needs to be in order for the project to be successful?
That is such a powerful statement. The next question we have from a listener is similar to where I was going with, is like investing in yourself, right? And you brought up a very strong and interesting point that people forget. People think it's all organic and natural, and you're born with it, or you'll have these sponsors who's gonna pave the way for you, and you're just gonna walk on this path, this golden path that's gonna lead you to the abundance. But the reality is, you have to invest in yourself and develop your narratives and seek help, something that is almost a taboo sometimes. It's just like, what? I need a coach? What are you talking about? Igor knows this. I think I myself have that syndrome. I was like, no, I'm doing just fine. I don't think I need a coach right now. I'm doing just fine. And we have a listener here who's asking something similar, saying, how do I learn to prioritize myself in my career? Maybe you have a small daily practice that works best for you, or some tips and references that we can leverage.
Yeah, of course. I think coaching is one of these really weird things. It's not really a daily practice, but what my coach does is help give me a daily practice because I won't do it on my own. So we'll come up with like, oh, what's the curiosity this week? I'm going to sit and see how my emotions are responding to the situation in the meeting rather than taking on other people's emotions, and just practice that for a week and see how it feels. These are the types of things that working with a partner, and if your manager is not very skilled in this, it can be really nice to bring in extra help. I started coaching more regularly when my manager was just like completely useful for any of these types of things. And to her credit, like very much is drowning in the day to day of running the team, right? And learning new processes and trying to understand. So she was so focused on that, I realized that my development was really in my hands and I didn't know what I was doing. So that's when I started looking for more outside influences to help me develop those daily practices. And they do change over time. So I mentioned the one experiment that we ran that week. Another week, my homework was like, go to an improv class. So I just went to improv and I was like, how are people reacting? How do people develop a storyline when there is no storyline? Because that's what executives are doing all day long. And that was the closest that I could get that day, right? Was like, let me just go on stage with people and like make up a plot. And I think that was a really powerful exercise as well. So these are the kinds of things that I like to do daily to help invest in myself, 4 hours on a Saturday away from my kid and away from my husband, like, that felt like I was investing in myself, and what I got from it was also really powerful. So finding those opportunities is always welcome.
That's such a great example, and I really appreciate you sharing it. And what I admire is that you actually followed the things your coach offered, because this is another like, interesting topic that sometimes we want to get some help, but we want to get that help in a special format, which we kind of expect it to be. And when we hear something that doesn't fit our norm, we tend to not follow those recommendations or advice. So kudos to you for following and expanding your comfort zone and going to improv classes. Another question I wanted to ask you is about what fulfills you in your job, because this is directly related to the question from our next and last listener for today. But before we move into that question, can you tell us what motivates you the most in your work in tech?
That's a great question. I think it's the opportunity to work alongside people that are really amazing at what they do. I've never not felt like I was working with a world-class team, whether it was engineers that were starting their own company after being at Tesla for many years. That was a startup experience that I joined, whether it was at Cisco, where it was communications equipment that the whole world used, whether it was at Apple with phones or new products or whatever we were working on. I really felt like the people that I were working with were true experts and that I was able to support them in an important way in an important time in their life. And so I think that reciprocity is something that I crave in my career, and not every position will allow me to achieve that. But luckily, I've been able to find ones that do.
Nice. So it let's see the question from our listener. She's in a new phase of her life, and she's job searching for the first time in 17 years. And she asks, how can I learn to value myself and my experience to land a great job?
Sure. I think as I age, I'm noticing that like my growth mindset is changing and developing in like different ways. I'm open to growing in certain ways and I'm very not open to growing in other ways. So I think for this listener, it would be a really great idea to take an audit of like the areas that they are excited to learn and grow and change their mindset and expand, and the ones that they're not, and go for a job or position that encompasses one or more of those areas of growth that they could become excited about. Because when you get excited about the learning opportunity, it doesn't really matter what the last 17 years were like or what anything else that had happened in the past. It's like, okay, let's move forward with this exciting thing, and that excitement will, I guess, fill the gaps in some of the other areas, and it will come through in an interview when you're actually excited about the position, and hopefully the hiring manager will see it as well.
Wonderful advice. And LP, you have such a vast an expanse of knowledge and experiences. How do you incorporate all of these experiences into your day-to-day life? Do you journal? Do you have any habits that you follow very regularly to take all these nuggets that are in your head and very fluently come out when you talk about them? What resources are your go-tos, and where can our listeners read more about you and all the wisdom that you have to share?
I've done absolutely nothing on this front. Thanks for the question. Now I have a new coaching practice maybe I need to like develop. I stopped journaling a long time ago. I will tell you one thing that I do. I don't write things down typically, but what you will see is like some sticky notes, and I like them to be lime green. I don't know why, but they're lime green sticky notes with handwritten things that I come across in newsletters or my own thinking. I have like one on my desk right now that says like smooth is fast and fast is good or something like that. But like don't go for speed over smoothness is kind of the essence of it. So yeah, I like to leave myself visual sticky notes every once in a while when I'm working through a concept. I was struggling also with like trying to use my own experience instead of getting curious about other people's experiences. So I have another sticky note that's like, I'm curious, I'm curious, I'm curious. And it's just like right there on my computer to help me remember when I'm in a WebEx or any other meeting that like, yeah, I'm curious about this problem. It's not that I am having a solution for you right now. Those kinds of things help me day to day. And then as far as resources, because resources are also important. I find the LinkedIn community of coaches right now is really putting out some great content. So if you don't follow one or more coaches, Igor, they can start with you. My coach is Kate Arms. I'll give her a shout out. She's fantastic and amazing. I also follow a lot of people that they're kind of developing this leadership model that is like more eco-conscious and more like human-centric rather than just profit and growth driven. And so I try and fill my head with all of that wisdom on a day-to-day basis, at least when I scroll my feed.
I love the diversity of answers we get to this question because this is our final question of the show. And there is no right answer, wrong answer, but it's just whatever works for each of us. And it's fantastic to just see that spectrum. For some, it's sticky notes. And for some, it's, I listen to this podcast every morning. It gets me really pumped up. I was listening to a song from Ace of Base, It's a Beautiful Life this morning. That was my mantra.
Music is a great one too. Yeah. I remember there was a time in my career where Justin Bieber's Hold On, definitely the mantra.
This was fantastic. As Igor had mentioned, this is going to be a blast, and it surely was. Thank you so much for spending the time with us, sharing your nuggets of wisdom, and more power to you. You're doing something which is not much understood. Program management, as I said, I've been one, and it's difficult to explain to people what you do. But I can tell you that this industry will pause, and there will be no launches if there weren't more of us. So, more power to you. Keep doing the amazing work you're doing and spread the word. You've got a lot to tell the world.
Likewise. Yeah. Super fun being on the podcast. Thank you so much for having me.